They huddled around her in the darkness, whispering frantic prayers. 20 Japanese women formed a human wall around their friend Akiko, whose swollen belly threatened to give away their secret. They had hidden her pregnancy for 3 months aboard the prison ship, terrified of what American soldiers would do to a pregnant enemy. But when the camp doctor walked into their medical examination room that cold October morning in 1945, everything they believed about their captors was about to shatter. What happened next would prove that sometimes your enemy's mercy is more dangerous than their cruelty. If stories like this fascinate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. These true accounts from World War II reveal the humanity that can exist even in the darkest times. The frost had come early to Wisconsin that year. On October 14, 1945, a military transport train pulled into Camp McCoy, its brakes screeching against frozen rails. The sound echoed across the empty plains, sharp and final. Inside the third car, 127 Japanese women sat in silence, their hands clasped in their laps, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. They had been traveling for 6 days, first on a prison ship from Manila to San Francisco, then on this train that carried them deeper and deeper into the heart of America. With each mile, their fear had grown. They were being taken inland, away from the coast, away from any hope of escape or rescue. They were being taken to a place so remote that no one would hear them scream. The train car was cold. Their breath came out in white clouds. Most of the women wore thin cotton dresses that had been issued to them in San Francisco, completely inadequate for Wisconsin's autumn chill. They shivered violently, their teeth chattering, their lips turning blue. But no one complained. Complaining was dangerous. Weakness was dangerous. Everything was dangerous now. Through the frost-covered windows, they could see their destination. Camp McCoy stretched out before them like something from a nightmare. Rows of identical wooden barracks painted dull gray. Watchtowers rising against the pale sky. Barbed wire fences surrounding everything. Armed guards walking the perimeter with rifles slung over their shoulders. This was a prison. This was where they would die. In the center of the group, hidden by the bodies of taller women, sat Akiko. She was 24 years old, 6 months pregnant, and absolutely terrified. For 3 months, her friends had been hiding her condition. On the prison ship, they had surrounded her during inspections, dressed her in loose clothing, told her to hunch over, to stay in the shadows. When she had morning sickness, they had covered the sounds with coughing. When her belly had started to show, they had wrapped her in extra layers of fabric and positioned themselves strategically around her. But now, as the train doors opened and cold Wisconsin air rushed in, Akiko knew the hiding was almost over. They would have medical examinations. They always did. And this time, there would be nowhere to hide. American soldiers appeared at the train doors, their voices loud and commanding in English. "Move out! Single file! No talking!" The translator, a Japanese-American soldier, repeated the orders in their language. His accent was strange, his words shaped by American vowels and consonants. He sounded like home and like enemy at the same time. The women stood on stiff legs and began to shuffle toward the exit. The smell hit them as they stepped onto the platform. Pine trees, wood smoke, something cooking in the distance that made their empty stomachs twist with hunger. The air was sharp and clean, so different from the stale, crowded air of the ship and train. One woman, Keiko, a former nurse from Osaka, inhaled deeply and thought of the mountains near her childhood home. Then she remembered where she was and felt ashamed for finding anything beautiful in this place. They were lined up on the platform, counted, and then marched toward a large brick building near the camp entrance. Their feet crunched on frozen grass. The sound of their walking was loud in the morning silence. Guards flanked them on both sides, not pointing their rifles at them but holding them ready. The women kept their eyes down, their shoulders hunched against the cold and the fear. Akiko walked in the middle of the group, surrounded by her protectors. Her friend Yuki walked directly behind her, close enough to hide Akiko's profile. Tomoe walked beside her, carrying an extra blanket that she periodically draped over Akiko's shoulders, obscuring her shape. Keiko walked in front, occasionally glancing back, her eyes full of worry. They all knew what was coming. They had talked about it in whispers during the long train ride, medical examinations. The Americans would want to check them for diseases, for lice, for anything that might spread through the camp. They would have to undress. They would have to be examined. And when they examined Akiko, they would discover the pregnancy. And then what? The women had heard terrible stories about what happened to pregnant prisoners. Some said the Americans would force her to give birth alone and then take the baby away. Others said they would do something worse, something to end the pregnancy entirely. A few whispered that pregnant prisoners were simply executed because they were too much trouble to deal with. No one knew which stories were true, but they all agreed that discovery would mean disaster. As they approached the brick building, a sign above the door read, "Camp Hospital," in white letters. Through the windows, they could see nurses in crisp white uniforms moving around inside. The women's pace slowed. Some were crying softly now. Others prayed under their breath. Akiko felt her baby kick inside her, a small flutter against her ribs, and she placed her hand over her belly, trying to send a silent message. Stay quiet. Stay still. Let us survive this. The doors opened. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of antiseptic and soap. An American officer stood inside, clipboard in hand, and behind him a doctor in a white coat. The doctor was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and glasses. He looked tired. He looked kind. But Akiko knew better than to trust appearances. The enemy could smile even as they destroyed you. "Welcome to Camp McCoy," the translator said, though the English words had been "fall in." The translation was always softer than the original command, as if the translator was trying to cushion them from the full force of their captivity. "You will undergo medical examination. This is required by international law for all prisoners of war. Please cooperate fully." Keiko stepped forward, her nurse's instincts overriding her fear. "What kind of examination?" she asked in broken English, one of the few women who had studied the language before the war. The American doctor looked at her and smiled. It was a genuine smile, she thought, not cruel or mocking. "Just basic health checks," he said slowly, speaking to her as if she were a child, or someone who couldn't understand, which technically she couldn't, not fully. "Height, weight, temperature, blood pressure. Check for tuberculosis, malaria, parasites. We need to make sure everyone is healthy." The translator repeated this in Japanese. The women looked at each other. Height and weight. That meant they would see Akiko's body clearly. Blood pressure meant they would touch her, feel her belly. There was no way to hide it now. Tomoe squeezed Akiko's hand. "We stay with you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, we stay with you." But even as she said it, they all knew that staying together wouldn't be enough. The truth was about to be revealed, and then everything would change. The examination room was large and bright, with white tile floors that reflected the harsh overhead lights. 20 metal examination tables lined the walls, separated by thin white curtains that offered the illusion of privacy but provided none. The women were divided into groups of 5 and directed to different sections of the room. Akiko's group included her closest friends, Keiko, Yuki, Tomoe, and Sachiko. They had orchestrated this carefully on the train, trading positions with other women, making sure they would stay together. Now they stood in a tight cluster around Akiko, trying to shield her for just a few more minutes. "Please remove your outer clothing and stand by the examination tables," a female nurse instructed through the translator. She was young, maybe 30, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was professional, neither kind nor cruel, just efficient. The women began to undress slowly, their fingers fumbling with buttons and ties. The warmth of the room, so welcome after the cold outside, now felt suffocating. Akiko's hands shook as she removed her outer dress, revealing the loose undershirt she wore beneath. It was made of thin cotton, intentionally baggy, and it hung over her belly in a way that might hide her pregnancy if no one looked too closely. But someone was looking closely. The blonde nurse had paused in her work with another group and was watching Akiko with a frown. Her eyes traveled from Akiko's face down to her midsection and then back up again. Akiko saw the exact moment when the nurse realized what she was seeing. The woman's eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. She set down her clipboard and walked toward them. "Wait," Keiko said in English, stepping between the nurse and Akiko. "Please wait." "Step aside," the nurse said, not unkindly but firmly. "I need to examine her." "She is fine," Keiko insisted, her English breaking down under stress. "She is healthy, no sick, no problem." "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." The nurse's voice was louder now, attracting attention from across the room. Other nurses paused in their work. A male doctor at the far end of the room looked up from his clipboard and started walking toward them. Yuki and Tomoe moved closer to Akiko, forming a tighter circle. It was instinctive, protective, and completely futile. The American nurse raised her hand and beckoned to the approaching doctor. "Dr. Morrison, I need you here." Dr. Morrison was the gray-haired doctor they had seen at the entrance. He approached with a calm expression, his hands in the pockets of his white coat. "What's the problem?" he asked the nurse, though his eyes were on the cluster of Japanese women who looked like they were preparing for battle. "I think this one might be pregnant," the nurse said quietly, but in the silent room everyone heard. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Pregnant. The other women in the room turned to Utsun. "Look." The American staff members exchanged glances, and Akiko's friends tightened their circle, their faces set with determination and terror. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. "Ladies, I need to examine her. It's important for her health and the baby's health. We can't help if we don't know what's going on." Keiko understood enough of this to grasp the meaning. "You take baby?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You hurt baby?" Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose in surprise, and then his face softened with understanding. "No," he said slowly and clearly. "No. We protect baby. We help. I promise." But promises from the enemy meant nothing. They had been promised safety before and found only bombs. They had been promised honor and found only defeat. Why would this promise be any different? Tomoe began to cry. Yuki was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Sachiko had her arms around Akiko's shoulders, holding on as if she could physically prevent what was about to happen. And Akiko, silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Let him see," she said in Japanese. "There's nowhere left to hide." Her friends looked at her in anguish, but they knew she was right. Slowly, reluctantly, they stepped back. Akiko stood alone, vulnerable, her hand pressed protectively against her belly. Dr. Morrison approached gently, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her. Akiko didn't understand the words, but she understood the gesture. She nodded once. He lifted the edge of her undershirt, and there was no hiding it anymore. Her belly was round and full, unmistakably pregnant. The baby kicked, visible even from the outside, and Dr. Morrison's face broke into a smile. "Well," he said softly. "Hello there." What happened next was not what any of the women expected. Dr. Morrison didn't call for guards. He didn't shout orders. He didn't reach for any instruments or syringes. Instead, he turned to the blonde nurse and said, "Get her a chair. And a blanket. She shouldn't be standing this long." The nurse hurried away and returned with a chair and a thick wool blanket. Dr. Morrison gestured for Akiko to sit, and when she hesitated, he said through the translator, "Please, you need to take care of yourself. When is the baby due?" Akiko stared at him. She didn't answer. She couldn't process what was happening. He was asking when the baby was due as if this were a normal situation, as if she were a patient at a regular hospital instead of an enemy prisoner about to be punished. "How many months?" Dr. Morrison tried again, holding up fingers. 4? 5? 6? Keiko, still standing protectively nearby, held up 6 fingers. 6 months, she said. 6 months, Dr. Morrison repeated, making a note on his clipboard. "Okay, that means we have about 3 months to prepare. You," he pointed to Keiko. "Are you a nurse?" Keiko blinked. "Yes, I was nurse, in Osaka." "Good. You'll help me monitor her pregnancy. I need to know immediately if there are any problems. Bleeding, severe pain, anything unusual?" He was speaking faster now, slipping back into his normal professional pace, and the translator was struggling to keep up. Another American doctor had joined them, a younger man with red hair and freckles. "Is she really pregnant?" he asked Dr. Morrison. "About 6 months along," Dr. Morrison confirmed. "Looks healthy, but we need to do a proper examination. Get her file ready. We'll need to track her nutrition carefully. She'll need extra rations, vitamin supplements, regular checkups." The red-haired doctor looked confused. "Do we have protocols for this? I mean, for a pregnant POW?" "We'll follow the same protocols we'd use for any pregnant woman," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "She's entitled to proper medical care under the Geneva Convention. Get it set up." The women watching this exchange couldn't follow all the English words, but they understood the tone. The American doctors weren't angry. They weren't threatening. They were acting like doctors, talking about vitamins and checkups and making sure the baby was healthy. Tomo grabbed the translator's arm. "What are they saying? Are they taking the baby? Are they hurting her?" The translator, a young Japanese-American soldier who looked overwhelmed by everything happening, shook his head. "No, they're saying they will take care of her. Give her extra food. Make sure the baby is healthy." "Why?" Yuki demanded. "Why would they do that? We're prisoners. We're enemies." The translator hesitated. "Because," he said slowly, "that's what doctors do. They take care of people, even enemies." But this made no sense to the women. In their experience, enemies didn't take care of each other. The Japanese military had not taken care of its prisoners. The stories that had filtered back from prisoner of war camps in Burma, the Philippines, and China were nightmares of starvation, disease, and deliberate cruelty. That's what happened to prisoners. That's what they expected to happen to them. Dr. Morrison was speaking again, this time directly to Akiko through the translator. "I need to examine you properly. Check the baby's heartbeat, measure your belly, make sure everything is developing normally. It won't hurt, I promise. But I need your permission. Will you let me help you?" Permission. He was asking permission. An American doctor was asking a Japanese prisoner for permission to help her. Akiko looked at her friends. Keiko gave a small nod. Yuki was still crying, but she nodded too. Tomoe and Sachiko held hands, their faces reflecting the same confusion and cautious hope that Akiko felt. "Yes," Akiko said quietly. "You can help." And so began the strangest and most uncomfortable truth these women had ever faced. The enemy was going to take care of them. Dr. Morrison conducted the examination with professional care. He measured Akiko's belly with a cloth tape measure, explaining each step through the translator. He listened to the baby's heartbeat with a stethoscope, his face breaking into another smile when he heard the strong, rapid thump, thump, thump. "Healthy," he announced. "Very healthy. Strong heartbeat." He checked Akiko's blood pressure, looked at her ankles for swelling, asked questions about her diet, her symptoms, whether she'd had any bleeding or pain. Keiko, using her nursing knowledge and broken English, helped translate the more technical questions. Her diet has been very poor, Keiko finally admitted. On the ship, very little food. Rice, sometimes fish, not enough. She is always hungry. Dr. Morrison's expression darkened. That needs to change immediately. She needs protein, vegetables, dairy. Growing a baby takes a lot of resources. He made more notes. I'm prescribing daily vitamin supplements and extra meal portions. She should eat 4 times a day if possible, and plenty of water. He stood up and looked at the group of women who had remained clustered around Akiko throughout the entire examination. You all care about her very much, he observed. That's good. She needs support. Pregnancy can be difficult, especially under these circumstances. Circumstances? Keiko repeated, unsure of the word. This situation, the translator clarified. Being a prisoner, being far from home. It's stressful. Will the baby be taken away? Sachiko asked suddenly, the question that had been haunting all of them. When it's born, will you take it? The translator looked uncomfortable but relayed the question to Dr. Morrison. The doctor's face grew serious. I don't know what will happen after the birth, he admitted. That's not my decision to make. But while she's here, while she's under my care, I will do everything I can to make sure both mother and baby are healthy and safe. That's my job. That's what I'm trained to do. It was an honest answer which somehow made it worse. He couldn't promise that Akiko could keep her baby. He couldn't promise anything about the future. But he could promise care in the present, and strange as it was, they found themselves believing him. After the examination, Akiko was given a separate bunk in a corner of the barracks, chosen specifically because it was away from drafts and close to the wood stove. She was given 2 extra blankets and a pillow, luxuries that the other women didn't have. She was given a package of vitamins and instructions to take one every morning. That evening, during their first meal in the camp mess hall, Akiko's tray had portions noticeably larger than everyone else's. Extra meat, an extra roll, a bowl of milk instead of just water. The other prisoners stared, some with envy, others with confusion. Why are they feeding her? So much? One woman whispered. Because she's pregnant, another replied. Because they want the baby healthy. But why? Why do they care about a Japanese baby? No one had an answer. It defied everything they knew about war, about enemies, about how prisoners were treated. In the Japan they came from, resources were scarce and only the valuable received extra. A pregnant prisoner was a burden, not someone deserving of care. But here, in this American prison camp, their pregnant friend was being given extra food, extra blankets, and regular medical attention. She was being treated like someone whose life mattered, like someone worth protecting. That night, in the darkness of the barracks, the women gathered around Akiko's bunk and spoke in whispers. I don't understand, Yuki said. Are they being kind because they're good people? Or is there some other reason? Does it matter? Tomoe replied. She's getting help. The baby has a chance. Isn't that what we wanted? Yes, Keiko said quietly. But accepting their help feels like betrayal. Like we're accepting that they're right and we're wrong. Like we're admitting defeat not just in war, but in everything we believed. And there it was. The real terror wasn't that the Americans would be cruel. The real terror was that they were being kind. And kindness from the enemy meant that everything they had been taught was a lie. Within a week, Akiko's pregnancy had become an open fact throughout the camp. The American guards knew, the other prisoners knew, even the camp commander knew. And astonishingly, no one punished her for it. No one even seemed to think it was particularly unusual or problematic. Every morning at 7 after breakfast, Akiko reported to the camp hospital. Dr. Morrison or one of the other medical staff would check her vital signs, measure her belly's growth, and ask about any discomfort. Keiko always accompanied her, both as translator and as medical consultant. Dr. Morrison had started teaching Keiko more advanced English medical terms, and she soaked up the knowledge like water after a drought. The baby is in breech position, Dr. Morrison said one morning, his hands on Akiko's belly. That means it's sitting bottom down instead of head down. We'll need to monitor this. If it doesn't turn by month 8, we might need to turn it manually or prepare for a more difficult delivery. Keiko translated, and Akiko's hand flew to her belly. Dangerous? She asked in Japanese. It can be, Dr. Morrison admitted through Keiko, but we have time. Many babies turn on their own, and if not, we're prepared. The casual confidence in his voice was startling. He spoke as if delivering a healthy baby from a Japanese prisoner was just another routine task, like setting a broken bone or treating a fever, as if there was no question that they would do whatever necessary to ensure a safe birth. The daily routine had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Wake at 6:30, breakfast at 7, Akiko's medical checkup at 7:30, then work assignments, though Akiko's were light, folding laundry in the warm laundry room, sorting supplies in the warehouse, tasks that didn't require heavy lifting or long periods of standing. The other women had regular work assignments too, but nothing brutal. Some worked in the kitchens, others did general maintenance around the camp. A few with education worked as translators or teachers, helping the American soldiers learn basic Japanese phrases. The work was steady but not exhausting, and they were paid in camp script that could be used at the canteen. The canteen was a revelation. It sold chocolate bars, cigarettes, soap, writing paper, and even small personal items like combs and ribbons. The women would stand in front of the candy display, marveling that they could buy sugar while pregnant women in Japan were starving. Akiko used her script to buy extra chocolate and share it with her friends. The doctor says the baby needs sugar for energy, she explained, though they all knew she just wanted to share the small luxury. They would sit in the barracks in the evening, slowly eating their chocolate, trying not to think about families back home who had nothing. Letters arrived sporadically, always censored with black marks where military censors had removed sensitive information. Yuki received a letter from her mother describing the food shortages in Hiroshima. The city was gone, reduced to ash, and survivors were living in makeshift shelters, eating whatever they could find. Yuki read the letter once, then hid it in her trunk. She couldn't bear to read it again while eating 3 meals a day in an American prison camp. Tomo's letters from her husband were worse. He was in a different POW camp, somewhere in the Philippines. His letters were brief, heavily censored, but the desperation bled through. "Are you eating? Are you safe? I think of you always. Hold on, survive." She wrote back, I am safe. I am eating. I am holding on." But she never mentioned how well they were being treated. It felt like a betrayal to admit it. Meals had become the central paradox of their existence. 3 times a day they sat at long tables in the mess hall and ate food better than what most Japanese civilians had seen in years. Meat, vegetables, bread, butter, milk, fruit. The variety was staggering. One morning they had scrambled eggs with ham, toast with jam, and fresh orange juice. Orange juice. When was the last time any of them had tasted an orange? Akiko was given even larger portions, following Dr. Morrison's orders. She ate dutifully, knowing she needed the nutrition for the baby, but every bite was tinged with guilt. Her baby was growing strong on American food, while Japanese babies were dying of starvation. How was she supposed to feel about that? "Don't think about it," Keiko advised. "Just eat. Just survive. That's all we can do." But it was impossible not to think about it. Survival had always been the goal, but survival at what cost? Survival while accepting the enemy's generosity? Survival while growing comfortable in captivity? The contrast between their treatment and what they expected grew sharper every day. In the barracks at night, the women would share stories of what they had been told would happen to them as prisoners. "They said Americans would torture us for information," one woman said. "But the only questions they ask are about our health and if we need anything." "They said we would be worked to death," another added. "But they give us breaks every few hours and won't let us lift anything heavy if we're tired." "They said we would be starved," Yuki contributed. "Instead, I've gained 10 pounds. The weight gain was visible on all of them. Their faces had filled out. Their skin had regained color. Their hair, which had been dull and brittle from malnutrition, was starting to shine again. They looked healthy, which felt like a betrayal of everyone back home who was suffering. Akiko's transformation was most dramatic. When she had arrived, she had been dangerously thin, her pregnancy barely visible because she was so malnourished. Now at 7 months, her belly was prominent and round. Her face had lost its gaunt look. Her arms had muscle again. Dr. Morrison was pleased with her progress. "Your baby is gaining weight nicely," he told her during one examination. "About 2 pounds now, maybe a bit more. Should be around 5 or 6 pounds at birth if we can keep your nutrition up." 5 or 6 pounds. A healthy weight. Akiko thought of the babies being born in Japan, premature and underweight, many dying within days because their mothers had nothing to feed them. Her baby would be healthy and strong, born in an enemy prison camp, cared for by enemy doctors. The Americans had set up a small library, and some of the women who could read English discovered books about pregnancy and childbirth. They would gather around in the evenings trying to understand the medical diagrams, practicing the English words, contraction, dilation, delivery. They were preparing for Akiko's birth as if it were a communal event, which in many ways it was. The American nurses had started giving Akiko prenatal classes, teaching her breathing exercises and positions for labor. Keiko attended too, determined to be Akiko's support during delivery. The blonde nurse who had first discovered the pregnancy, whose name was Ruth, had become unexpectedly kind. "When I had my first baby," Ruth told them through the translator one day, "I was so scared. It helps to have people you trust around you. Who do you want in the room when you deliver?" Akiko looked at her friends. "All of them," she said. "I want all my friends." Ruth laughed. "That's a lot of people for a delivery room, but we'll see what we can do." The idea that they could make requests, that their preferences mattered, was still shocking. They were supposed to be prisoners, yet they were being treated like guests, like people whose feelings and wishes were important. The camp had a small recreation yard where prisoners could walk during free time. As Akiko's pregnancy advanced, her daily walks became a sort of procession. She would walk slowly, one hand on her lower back, and her friends would walk with her, flanking her like guards. American soldiers would smile and nod as they passed. One young guard named Jimmy had started bringing small gifts: a sweet roll from the mess hall, an extra apple, a pair of warm socks. "For the baby," he would say in halting Japanese, pointing to Akiko's belly. She would bow and accept the gifts, confused by his kindness. "Why do they care?" Sachiko asked one evening. "We killed their friends. We bombed Pearl Harbor. We fought them for years. Why do they care if her baby is warm?" "Because they see her as a person," Keiko said thoughtfully. "Not as an enemy, but as a pregnant woman who needs help. That's what Dr. Morrison told me once. He said medicine doesn't care about politics. A patient is a patient." "But we're not just patients," Tomo argued. "We're prisoners. We're supposed to be punished." "Maybe that's the difference between us and them," Yuki said quietly. "They punish by defeating you in war. But once you're defeated, once you're captured, they treat you like a human being. We were taught that surrender was the ultimate shame, that prisoners deserved nothing. But they don't think that way." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Everything they had been taught about the enemy, about honor, about the proper treatment of prisoners, was being challenged daily by simple acts of kindness. The human connections that formed were unexpected and complicated. Dr. Morrison had become something like a protective father figure to Akiko, checking on her multiple times a day, adjusting her diet, worrying about every symptom. His own daughter was pregnant back in Michigan, he had mentioned once, about the same stage as Akiko. He carried a photo of her in his wallet and had shown it to Akiko, pointing and saying, "Baby, baby." As if this made them connected somehow, Nurse Ruth had 3 children of her own and would share stories about her pregnancies, using simple English and lots of gestures. She taught Akiko how to massage her swollen feet and gave her a bottle of lotion for her stretching belly. These were intimate acts of care that transcended language and nationality. The young guard Jimmy turned out to be only 19, just a kid really, and he was desperately homesick. He had started learning Japanese from the women, trading English lessons for Japanese ones. He would practice his phrases during his rounds. "Ohayo gozaimasu." "Good morning." "Genki desu ka?" "How are you?" "Arigatu." "Thank you." His accent was terrible, but his effort was genuine. One day Jimmy brought a care package his mother had sent from home. Inside were knitted baby clothes, tiny socks, and a soft blanket. "My mom made these for my sister's baby," he explained through the translator. "But my sister's not due until spring. She said to give them to your friend for now." The women stared at the tiny clothes. They were soft and perfect, lovingly made by an American mother who had heard about a pregnant Japanese prisoner and decided to help. An enemy helping an enemy's baby. Akiko accepted the clothes with tears streaming down her face. That night she and her friends examined every stitch, marveling at the craftsmanship and the kindness that had created them. "An American grandmother made these for my baby," Akiko said wonderingly. "She doesn't know me. She doesn't know if my baby will live or die, but she made these anyway." "Because that's what grandmothers do," Tomo said. "They take care of babies. All babies, even enemy babies." The barrier between us and them was crumbling in small daily ways. The women found themselves laughing at Jimmy's terrible Japanese pronunciation. They found themselves looking forward to their medical checkups because Dr. Morrison always had encouraging words. They found themselves accepting Nurse Ruth's hugs when Akiko was having a difficult day. But with every act of kindness, the guilt grew heavier. They were bonding with their captors. They were accepting help from the enemy. They were starting to see these Americans not as monsters, but as people. Good people, even. And that realization was more painful than any torture could have been. "What do we do with this?" Keiko asked one night, holding up the baby clothes. "How do we reconcile being cared for by the people we were taught to hate?" "I don't know," Akiko admitted. "But I know that my baby needs these clothes. My baby needs the food they're giving me. My baby needs Dr. Morrison's care. Whatever happens after, whatever it means about loyalty or betrayal or anything else, right now my baby needs them, and I can't refuse that even if it makes me a traitor." "It doesn't make you a traitor," Yuki said firmly. "It makes you a mother, and they," she gestured toward the camp hospital visible through the window, "are acting like doctors and nurses and decent human beings. Maybe the real betrayal was what we were taught about them. Maybe the real lie was that all Americans were demons who deserved to be destroyed." The conversation ended there, too dangerous to continue. Because if the enemy wasn't really the enemy, if they were just people doing their best in a terrible situation, then what had the war been for? What had all the sacrifice and death and suffering been for? These were questions without good answers, so they stopped asking them. Instead, they focused on the immediate, preparing for a birth, supporting their friend, and trying to survive the strange mercy of their captors. As Akiko entered her 8th month, the ideological struggle within each woman reached its peak. They could no longer pretend that their treatment was temporary or insincere. The evidence of American care was everywhere, undeniable and constant. Akiko lay on her bunk one afternoon, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks. Dr. Morrison had confirmed that the baby had turned head down on its own, a relief after weeks of worry. The baby was healthy, strong, perfectly positioned for birth. And she owed all of this to her enemies. "I don't know what to teach this child," she confessed to Keiko. "How do I explain that they were born in a prison camp? That enemy doctors kept them alive? That an American grandmother knitted their first clothes?" "You tell them the truth," Keiko said. "That war is complicated. That people are complicated. That sometimes your enemy shows you more mercy than your own country." But the truth was dangerous. The truth challenged everything. Back in Japan, Akiko's pregnancy would have been a scandal. Unmarried and pregnant, she would have been disgraced, possibly disowned. The father, a Japanese soldier who had died in the Philippines, had never even known about the baby. In traditional Japanese society, her situation would have been shameful, worthy of punishment and social exile. Here in an American prison camp, she was treated with respect and care. Dr. Morrison never asked about the father. He never made her feel ashamed. He simply focused on keeping her and the baby healthy, as if that was all that mattered. Yuki's struggle was different, but equally profound. She had started working in the camp library, organizing books and helping other prisoners learn English. She had discovered American novels, stories about individual freedom, about choosing your own path, about questioning authority. These were concepts completely foreign to the Japan she had known. "Listen to this," she said one evening, reading from a worn copy of a book. "It says here that all men are created equal, that they have rights that can't be taken away. Rights to life, liberty, and pursuing happiness." "That's propaganda," Fumiko said sharply. She was one of the few women who still resisted accepting their captor's kindness. "American words that they don't actually believe. If they believed it, why did they put us in a camp?" "Because we were at war," Yuki replied. "But even in war, even in a prison camp, they're treating us like humans with rights. They're following their own rules about how to treat prisoners. When did Japan ever do that?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. They all knew stories of how the Japanese military had treated prisoners. The Bataan Death March, the Burma Railway, the prison camps in China. Thousands of Allied prisoners had died from starvation, disease, and deliberate cruelty. The contrast with their own treatment was stark and shameful. Tomoe received a letter from her husband that made everything worse. He described his prison camp in the Philippines, overcrowded, disease-ridden, barely enough food to survive. He had lost 40 pounds. Many men were dying daily. The guards were harsh, the work brutal. And then he wrote something that made Tomo's heart break. "I hope you are suffering less than we are. I hope the Americans are treating you according to the Geneva Convention, as they claim to do." She showed the letter to her friends. "He hopes we're being treated well," she said, her voice cracking. "He hopes the enemy is showing us mercy, and they are. They're feeding us. They're keeping us healthy. They're helping Akiko's baby, while our own soldiers starve in their camps." The injustice of it was overwhelming. Not the injustice of their captivity, but the injustice of realizing that your enemy was more humane than your own side. The debates in the barracks became more honest and more painful. The women had stopped pretending that their treatment was normal, or that they understood it. Now they were wrestling with what it meant for their identity, their loyalty, and their future. "I feel like I'm betraying everyone back home," Sachiko admitted one night. "My parents are starving in Osaka. My little sister died last year because there was no medicine. And here I am, healthy and fed, being cared for by the people who bombed our cities." "But you didn't choose to be here," Keiko pointed out. "You didn't ask for this treatment. It's being given to you because of their beliefs, not because you deserve it less than the people suffering at home." "That's the point, though," Yuki said. "They believe everyone deserves it. That's what Dr. Morrison told me yesterday. He said every human being deserves basic care and dignity, regardless of what country they're from or what they've done. That's not how we were raised to think." "Because we were raised to value the collective over the individual," Tomo added. "The group matters more than the person. The nation matters more than the citizen. But here they act like each person matters individually, like Akiko matters as Akiko, not as a Japanese prisoner or a tool for the state." "And you think that's better?" Fumiko challenged. "This individualism, this self-centeredness, that's what makes them weak. That's what makes them soft." "They won the war," Yuki said quietly. "They dropped atomic bombs that ended the fighting in minutes. They built weapons and planes and ships that overwhelmed us completely. Does that seem soft to you?" Fumiko had no response. The evidence was undeniable. America had crushed Japan militarily while simultaneously maintaining enough resources and organization to treat prisoners well. They had the strength to destroy and the discipline to show mercy. That combination was more frightening than simple cruelty would have been. Akiko spoke up, her voice heavy with the weight of her pregnancy and her thoughts. "I've been thinking about what I'll tell my child about this time. and I realized I can't lie to them. I can't tell them that Americans were monsters because it wouldn't be true. I can't tell them that Japan was always right because that's not true either. All I can tell them is what happened, that in the darkest time of my life, when I thought I would die and my baby would die, our enemies chose to help us, and that kindness changed something fundamental in how I see the world. But at what cost? Fumiko pressed. You're changing your worldview to match theirs. You're letting them remake you. No, Akiko said firmly, her hand on her belly where the baby was moving. They're not remaking me. They're showing me that there's more than one way to see the world. More than one way to be strong. More than one definition of honor. Back home, I would have been shamed for this pregnancy. Here, they're protecting me. Which system values human life more? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind against the barracks walls. Each woman was wrestling with the same question. If everything you believed about the enemy was wrong, what else might be wrong? And if your enemy showed you more humanity than your own side, where did your loyalty belong? The breaking point came when Akiko went into labor. It was December 15th, 1945, a cold Wisconsin morning. Akiko woke before dawn with pain radiating across her lower back. At first, she thought it was just another uncomfortable night of late pregnancy. But then the pain came again, stronger, wrapping around her belly like a band of iron. "Keiko," she whispered urgently, reaching for her friend in the next bunk. "I think it's time." Within minutes, the barracks was awake. Women surrounded Akiko, helping her dress, supporting her as she walked. They sent someone running for Dr. Morrison, even though it was barely 5 in the morning. The doctor arrived within 10 minutes, still buttoning his coat, his hair uncombed. "How far apart are the contractions?" he asked immediately. "Maybe 10 minutes, Keiko estimated, her nurse's training kicking in. "Let's get her to the hospital. Slowly, no rushing." The walk across the frozen camp to the hospital was surreal. The sun hadn't risen yet. Guards stood at their posts, watching curiously as a group of Japanese women helped their pregnant friend toward the medical building. One guard opened the hospital door for them, holding it wide, calling ahead to alert the nurses. Inside, everything had been prepared. Dr. Morrison had been planning for this delivery for weeks. A room had been set aside, equipped with everything needed for childbirth. Nurse Ruth was already there, along with 2 other nurses. They helped Akiko onto the bed, covered her with warm blankets, and began monitoring her vital signs. "Who do you want with you?" Dr. Morrison asked through the translator. Akiko looked at her friends. "All of them. I want them all here." Dr. Morrison smiled. "All right, but they have to wash their hands and follow the nurse's instructions. This is still a medical procedure." So they stayed. Keiko, Yuki, Tomoe, Sachiko, and 4 other women who had become Akiko's family during these months of captivity. They washed their hands carefully, put on clean gowns, and positioned themselves around Akiko's bed. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain, of fear, of exhaustion, but also 14 hours of support. Keiko held Akiko's hand and coached her breathing, using the techniques the American nurses had taught them. Yuki wiped Akiko's forehead with cool cloths. Tomoe whispered encouragement in Japanese. The American medical staff moved around them efficiently, monitoring the baby's heartbeat, checking Akiko's progress, preparing for the delivery. At 7:47 p.m., as the winter darkness pressed against the hospital windows, Akiko's baby entered the world. A girl, small but healthy, with a loud cry that filled the room. Dr. Morrison caught her, cleared her airways, and placed her on Akiko's chest. "A girl," he announced, his voice full of joy. "A healthy baby girl. Listen to those lungs." Akiko looked down at her daughter, this tiny life that had somehow survived war, captivity, starvation, and uncertainty. The baby had been born in an enemy prison camp, delivered by enemy doctors, surrounded by enemy nurses, but she was alive, she was healthy, she was perfect. And in that moment, Akiko realized that she could never hate these people. She could never go back to believing that Americans were monsters, because monsters don't stay up for 14 hours helping deliver a prisoner's baby. Monsters don't cry with joy when they hear a healthy cry from an enemy's child. Monsters don't carefully wrap a newborn in warm blankets and say, "She's beautiful. Congratulations." The enemy had just given her daughter life, and that gift demolished every belief she had ever held about loyalty, honor, and where the lines between good and evil truly lay. The revelation didn't come as a single moment, but as a cascade of realizations that built on each other until the weight of truth became undeniable. It started with the way Dr. Morrison held Akiko's baby. He cradled her with the practiced ease of a grandfather, checking her reflexes, counting her fingers and toes, talking to her in that universal baby voice that transcended language and culture. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." Nurse Ruth cleaned the baby gently, dressed her in one of the tiny outfits from Jimmy's mother, and wrapped her in a soft blanket. Her movements were tender, careful, as if this baby born to an enemy prisoner was as precious as any baby born to an American mother. Keiko watched all of this and felt something inside her crack open. She had delivered babies before, in Osaka, in military field hospitals across the Pacific. She had seen how different people treated newborns. Some with love, some with indifference, some with disappointment if the baby was the wrong gender or born at an inconvenient time. But here, in this American hospital, this enemy baby was being treated like a miracle. "Why?" Keiko asked Dr. Morrison directly, speaking in her broken English. "Why you care so much? She is enemy baby. You can let her die. No one would know. No one would blame you." Dr. Morrison looked shocked by the question. "Let her die? She's a baby. An innocent life? Why would I let her die?" "Because we are enemies," Keiko said, gesturing to herself, to Akiko, to all the Japanese women in the room. "We killed Americans. We fought you. We are not friends." "You're not my friends," Dr. Morrison agreed. "But you're human beings. And that baby is innocent of everything. She didn't fight anyone. She didn't kill anyone. She's just a child who deserves a chance at life." He paused, looking at Keiko seriously. "Is that really so hard to understand? That we treat you humanely?" "Yes," Keiko said simply, "because we would not do the same." The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. The Japanese women in the room looked at each other, recognizing the honesty of Keiko's words. They knew how their military had treated prisoners. They knew the stories. They knew the shame. Dr. Morrison's face softened with sadness. "I know," he said quietly. "I've heard the stories from our soldiers who were prisoners in your camps. I know how they were treated. But that doesn't mean we should do the same. That doesn't mean we should abandon our principles because someone else abandoned theirs." "Principles," Yuki repeated, tasting the English word. "Beliefs about what's right and wrong," the translator clarified. "Rules we follow even when it's hard." "Even for enemies?" Tomo asked. "Especially for enemies," Dr. Morrison replied. "It's easy to be kind to friends. But being kind to enemies, treating them with dignity even when they didn't do the same for you, that's what separates civilization from barbarism. That's what the Geneva Convention is about. Rules for how to wage war humanely." "War humanely," Sachiko said with bitter irony. "That is contradiction." "Yes," Dr. Morrison agreed. "It is. War is hell. War is terrible. But even in hell we can choose not to become monsters. We can choose to remember that our enemies are humans, too, that they have families, children, lives worth protecting." Akiko, holding her newborn daughter, felt tears streaming down her face. Not tears of joy, though she was joyful. Not tears of relief, though she was relieved. These were tears of profound recognition and grief. Everything she had been taught was wrong. Every story about American savagery was a lie. Every piece of propaganda about the enemy's brutality was projection. A description of what Japan had done, attributed falsely to the Americans. The real horror wasn't that the Americans had been cruel. The real horror was that they had been kind, and that kindness revealed the depths of the lie she had been living. "I'm sorry," Akiko said in Japanese, looking at Dr. Morrison through her tears. "I'm so sorry." The translator conveyed this, and Dr. Morrison looked confused. "Sorry for what?" "For believing you were monsters. For hating you. For everything my country did to yours." Dr. Morrison's eyes grew misty. He reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. "You don't need to apologize for your country's actions. You're not responsible for what your government did any more than I'm personally responsible for dropping atomic bombs on your cities. We're just people caught in the middle of something terrible, trying to do the right thing in an impossible situation." He straightened up, addressing all the women in the room. "This baby doesn't care about politics or war. She doesn't know what country she was born in or who won or lost. She just wants to be warm, fed, and loved, and that's what we're going to give her. Not because we're heroes, not because we're better than anyone else, but because it's the right thing to do." In that moment, the last walls of resistance crumbled. The Japanese women in that room understood with painful clarity that they had been on the wrong side of more than just a military conflict. They had been on the wrong side of a moral divide, fighting for a system that valued the state over the individual, that saw people as expendable tools, that justified cruelty in the name of honor. And the enemy, the Americans they had been taught to hate and fear, had shown them a different way. A way where even your enemies deserved dignity, where even an enemy's baby deserved care, where humanity could exist even in the midst of hatred. The baby, innocent and perfect, began to cry. Akiko adjusted her position, and Nurse Ruth helped guide the baby to nurse for the first time. As the baby latched on and began to feed, Akiko looked up at the faces around her. Japanese women who had become her family, American doctors and nurses who had saved her child's life. "What should I name her?" Akiko asked. "That's your choice," Dr. Morrison said through the translator. "A name from your culture, your family. She's your daughter." But Keiko had another idea. Give her a name that means peace, she suggested, or hope, something that shows what she represents. Akiko thought for a moment, then smiled through her tears. Nozomi, she said. It means hope. Because she gives me hope that maybe, someday the world can be better than this. That people can be better than this. Nozomi, Dr. Morrison repeated, pronouncing it carefully. That's beautiful. Welcome to the world, Nozomi. And in that Wisconsin hospital room in December 1945, a baby born to enemies, delivered by enemies, named Hope, represented the most dangerous weapon of all, the possibility of forgiveness, understanding, and peace. The days following Nozomi's birth were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Akiko remained in the hospital for a week, standard procedure for all new mothers. The American nurses taught her how to care for her newborn, how to bathe her, how to change her diapers, how to recognize different cries and what they meant. Jimmy the guard became an honorary uncle, bringing small gifts every day. A rattle his mother had sent, a soft toy, a package of baby powder. He would stand at the hospital room door, too shy to come in, just smiling at the baby and giving a thumbs up. The other Japanese women took turns visiting, bringing gifts they had made themselves. A blanket woven from unraveled yarn, a mobile made from paper cranes, a simple kimono sewn from scraps of fabric. They treated Nozomi like their communal daughter, a symbol of survival and hope. Dr. Morrison continued his daily checkups, monitoring both Akiko and the baby's health. She's thriving, he reported with satisfaction. Growing well, nursing well, healthy in every way. You're doing a great job. But beneath the joy and relief, questions loomed. What would happen now? Akiko was still a prisoner. Nozomi had been born in a POW camp. What was the baby's status? What rights did she have? Where would they go when the war officially ended and repatriation began? Dr. Morrison had no answers. I'm a doctor, not a bureaucrat, he admitted. I don't know what the official policy is for babies born in POW camps, but I'll do everything I can to make sure you're both taken care of. Keiko had started researching the Geneva Convention, trying to understand the legal framework of their situation. She discovered that prisoners of war were entitled to repatriation after hostilities ended, but the rules about children born in captivity were unclear. Was Nozomi Japanese, American, stateless? We'll figure it out, Naoi, Dr. Morrison assured them. One day at a time. Right now, the priority is keeping you healthy and safe. It was this uncertainty, this living in limbo, that defined the next several months. Winter turned to spring. The war in the Pacific had been over since August 1945, but the process of repatriating thousands of Japanese prisoners was slow and complicated. Ships had to be arranged, paperwork processed, destinations determined. In the meantime, life in Camp McCoy continued its strange routine. Akiko and Nozomi were given a small private room in the barracks, a concession to her need for quiet at night when the baby cried. The other women didn't resent this special treatment, they celebrated it. Nozomi had become their mascot, their symbol of survival. As Nozomi grew from newborn to infant, something remarkable happened. The American guards and staff fell in love with her. They would stop by the barracks to see her, bringing gifts and smiling at her antics. She was the only baby in the camp, a reminder of life and innocence in a place defined by war and captivity. Dr. Morrison's daughter back in Michigan had given birth to a son around the same time as Nozomi's birth. He showed Akiko photos, pointing out the similarities between the babies, laughing at how they both made the same expressions. Babies are universal, he said. They don't care about borders or politics. But the letters from Japan painted a darker picture. Akiko's family had learned of Nozomi's birth through censored correspondence. Her mother's response was complicated. Joy at a new grandchild, concern about the circumstances, worry about what Akiko would face when she returned home as an unmarried mother. Come home when you can, her mother wrote. But know that things are difficult here. Unmarried mothers face shame. A baby born in an American prison camp will be seen as tainted. I will protect you as much as I can, but be prepared. Akiko read this letter while holding Nozomi, who was cooing and reaching for her mother's face. Tainted, Akiko repeated bitterly. You are perfect. How could anyone see you as anything but perfect? Keiko, reading over her shoulder, shook her head. They don't understand. They weren't here. They didn't see how you were treated. They didn't see Americans caring for an enemy's baby. They're still living in the old world, the one defined by propaganda and hatred. And we're living in something new, Yuki added. Something we don't have words for yet. Somewhere between enemy and friend, between war and peace, between old beliefs and new understanding. In June 1946, 8 months after Nozomi's birth, orders finally came. The women at Camp McCoy would be repatriated to Japan. Ships were being prepared. They would leave within the month. The announcement brought mixed emotions. Relief at finally going home. Fear of what they would find. Anxiety about how they would explain their experiences. And for Akiko, terror about what would happen to Nozomi in a Japan that might reject them both. Dr. Morrison called Akiko to his office a week before departure. "I have something for you," he said, handing her a thick envelope. Inside were detailed medical records, everything about her pregnancy, Nozomi's birth, the baby's health checks and vaccinations. "Take these with you. Find a good doctor in Japan and give them these records. Nozomi will need continued care, especially in her first year." He also gave her a letter, written in English and translated into Japanese. "This is a letter explaining that you received proper medical care during your pregnancy and that Nozomi is a healthy, normal child. If anyone questions her health or her birth, show them this letter. It's signed by me and notarized by the camp commander." Akiko stared at the documents, overwhelmed. "Why?" she asked. "Why you help so much?" Dr. Morrison smiled sadly. "Because you're a patient who trusted me with her care. Because Nozomi is a baby who deserved a chance at life. Because treating people with dignity isn't conditional on nationality or circumstance. It's just the right thing to do." He paused, then added, "And because maybe, just maybe, if enough people on both sides remember that our enemies are human too, we won't repeat the mistakes that led to this war." And so Akiko returned to Japan, carrying baby Nozomi and a truth that would shape the rest of her life. The soap and vitamins given by American doctors, the baby clothes knitted by an American grandmother, the medical records carefully maintained by Dr. Morrison. All of it became more than just objects. They became proof that even in war, humanity could survive. The prejudice Akiko faced in post-war Japan was real and painful. An unmarried mother with a baby born in an American prison camp was viewed with suspicion and shame, but Akiko refused to hide the truth. She told her story to anyone who would listen, how enemy doctors had saved her baby's life, how enemy nurses had taught her to be a mother, how enemy guards had brought gifts for a child they had no reason to care about. Some people rejected her story, but others listened and began to question their own assumptions about the enemy. And slowly, in small ways, Akiko's testimony joined thousands of others in reshaping how Japanese people understood the Americans. Nozomi grew up healthy and strong, never knowing hunger like so many children born in post-war Japan. She carried with her the legacy of her birth, that enemies can show mercy, that dignity transcends nationality, and that sometimes the hardest thing to accept is kindness from those you were taught to hate. As Dr. Morrison had hoped, maybe enough people on both sides would remember that their enemies were human too. And maybe that memory would help prevent the next war. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. History is full of uncomfortable truths like this one. Stories that challenge what we think we know about enemies and allies, about war and peace, about who the real heroes are. These stories matter. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Leave a comment telling us what you think. And remember, even in the darkest times, humanity can survive if we choose to see it.